Let's be clear, Julian announced, his voice slicing through the quiet grief of the funeral reception. The preliminary injunction is in effect. All 17 paintings, valued at a conservative $3 million, are now under my control pending probate. He held up a sheaf of papers, a victory flag, in my own living room. The hushed conversations of our guests died instantly. Every eye was on me, the suddenly frail, 79-year-old widower. A few people gasped. This was a new, public kind of cruelty I hadn't anticipated from my stepson. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound like tearing silk. It's just business, Philip. My mother would have wanted her assets managed properly, not collecting dust on your walls. He glanced around the room, a predator assessing his new territory. The implication was clear and brutal. I was nothing more than a temporary custodian, and my time was up. The finality of his tone, the smug confidence in his eyes, made the air thick and hard to breathe. He believed he had already won everything. Our old friend, Mrs. Gable, put a trembling hand to her mouth. My late wife's cousin, Robert, took a half-step forward before his wife held him back. Julian didn't care. He gestured to a man in a cheap suit standing by the door, a notary with a portable scanner. "We'll be cataloging them this afternoon," Julian said, tapping the court order. "Don't touch anything." The document, with its cold official seal, seemed to suck all the warmth from the room, leaving only the scent of wilting lilies and legal ink. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I simply stood by the mantelpiece, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I met Julian's triumphant gaze and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't surrender. It was something else, something he was too arrogant to see. A flicker of confusion crossed his face before he dismissed it as the senile acceptance of a defeated old man. He had no idea what Beatrice had taught me about patience, or about the fine art of providence. The room held its breath, waiting for my collapse, my rage, my plea. The man in the suit powered up his scanner, its low hum an engine of my public dispossession. I could feel the weight of their pity, their shock. This was it, the moment of absolute humiliation. I cleared my throat, ready to speak the one sentence that would change everything, the sentence that would begin his end. But months earlier, on a cold Tuesday afternoon, just after Beatrice's heart finally gave out, it all began not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a closing door. The house was silent for the first time in 50 years. The absence of Beatrice's soft humming was a physical weight. I walked through the rooms of our modern home, a gallery of our shared life. A shimmering Devoncorn hung over the fireplace. A brooding Rothko dominated the far wall. Each painting was a memory, a trip, a passion we pursued together. The air was thick with the faint, comforting smell of her favorite things, old paper from her library, and the lingering scent of turpentine from her small restoration studio. It was the scent of my grief. The doorbell rang, a harsh, electronic sound that shattered the peace. It was Julian. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't hug me. He walked past me, his eyes already scanning the walls, his gaze acquisitive and cold. "I'll need a full inventory, Philip," he said, pulling out his phone to take a picture of the de Kooning in the hall. "For the estate lawyers, we need to get a proper valuation immediately." He spoke of our life's collection, as if it were a stock portfolio, to be liquidated. I was sitting in Beatrice's reading chair, her old leather-bound photo album resting on my lap. It was heavy, filled with faded Kodachrome prints of our travels. Julian glanced at it with utter disdain. "What is that old thing?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "Sentimental junk. You should probably throw that out. It just adds to the clutter." He waved the dismissive hand at the album, the repository of my most precious memories, and turned his attention back to the multi-million-dollar canvas above my head. "Now that is what matters," he said. "My mother's will is straightforward," Julian continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed, legalistic tone. "But her assets are complex. I've retained a firm, Caldwell and Finch, to ensure her wishes are executed precisely." The threat was thinly veiled. He wasn't her son mourning a loss. He was a corporate raider staging a takeover. The names of the law firm hung in the air, a promise of the sterile, merciless battle to come. He was telling me that my love and memory meant nothing against his legal firepower. I looked at his hardened face and saw a ghost. I remembered a summer in Florence years ago. Beatrice and I had taken a teenage Julian to the Uffizi Gallery. He'd been enthralled, his eyes wide with wonder, as Bea explained the brushstrokes of a Botticelli. She'd put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Art isn't about ownership, my love. It's about guardianship." He had nodded then, a boy who seemed to understand. Now, that boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw only price tags. The first letter from Caldwell and Finch arrived a week later. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper that felt cold to the touch. The language was dense, filled with terms like fiduciary duty, asset preservation, and testamentary intent. It was a formal demand for access to the collection for appraisal and a warning against unauthorized transport or sale. They were treating me like a squatter in my own home, a potential thief of my own memories. The letter felt like the first shovel of dirt on my wife's grave. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the dark, staring at the paintings. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the canvases. The house was cold. I hadn't thought to turn up the heat. In the silence, I could almost hear the loud, boisterous laughter from the last dinner party we'd hosted. Now the quiet was absolute, broken only by the rustle of legal papers on the table next to me. The contrast was a physical pain, a hollowness in my chest. My phone rang. It was Julian, his voice impatient. "Did you get the letter from my lawyers?" he asked, skipping any pleasantries. "Good. The appraiser will be there Thursday." I started to protest, to ask for more time, but he cut me off. "Look, Philip, let's be honest. My mother would have wanted me to have these, not some stuffy museum. It's my birthright." His justification was so nakedly greedy, so utterly devoid of the principles Beatrice cherished, that it left me speechless. It was never about her wishes, only his. On Thursday, at 10 a.m. sharp, the appraiser arrived. He was a small, nervous man, accompanied by two assistants who moved with a detached, clinical efficiency. They set up lights and cameras, their metallic equipment clanking against the hardwood floors. For hours, they photographed, measured, and documented every piece, their hushed tones discussing market trends and auction records. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of my own life, while strangers cataloged it for sale. The scent of turpentine was overwhelmed by the sterile smell of their cleaning solution. Julian was there, of course, overseeing the process like a general. He pointed out a small crack in the varnish of the deep inkhorn. "Make a note of that," he told the appraiser. "That might affect the reserve price." He was discussing the flaws of a painting Beatrice had lovingly restored by hand, a piece she'd spent a month on in her studio. He saw financial liability. I saw her patient, steady hands and the smudge of paint she always got on her cheek. The felt fresh, a new cut every time he spoke. While they worked, I retreated to my study. I picked up Beatrice's photo album again, its weight a familiar comfort. I flipped through the pages, seeing our life unfold. Us in Paris in '78, Bea laughing in front of the Pompidou. Us in a small garden behind the house, her hands covered in dirt. Each photo was a testament to a life built on love and shared passions, not on market value. The album felt like the only thing in the house that was truly mine, the only thing he hadn't yet tried to monetize. I called our old family lawyer, Arthur Vance. He was semi-retired, but agreed to see me. Arthur was a kind man who had known Beatrice for 40 years. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern. "This is monstrous, Philip," he said, his voice laced with genuine outrage. "Julian is twisting her intent. Let me look at the will. Beatrice was a sharp woman. There must be something in the language, a clause we can use to protect you and the collection." For the first time in weeks, a fragile sliver of hope ignited within me. 2 days later, Arthur called back. The hope in my chest turned to ash. "I'm sorry, Philip," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "It's ironclad." She named him the sole beneficiary of her personal property. and the collection is legally defined as such. She must have trusted he would do the right thing. He explained that any challenge would be long, costly, and likely futile. He has the law on his side, Arthur concluded grimly. The legal system, the very framework of order, was being used as a weapon against me. The next blow came via email from Julian. It was a forward from a prestigious London auction house. Locking in the fall catalog, the subject line read, "Tentative date, October 26th. An auction was being scheduled." He was moving that fast. The message to me was simple and cruel, just keeping you in the loop. The contracts are being drawn up. The paintings weren't just being appraised, they were being prepared for international sale. I had weeks, maybe days, before they were gone forever. I remember staring at the email, the bright white screen burning my eyes. The coffee I'd been drinking had gone cold in my mug. Outside, an overcast and gray sky had opened up, and a cold rain began to streak down the window pane, blurring the world outside. The rhythmic drumming of the rain on the glass was the only sound. It felt like the world was weeping with me. Each drop was a tick of the clock, counting down the time until my life's work with Beatrice vanished. I called Julian, intending to plead with him. He picked up, but he was clearly on another call, his hand muffling the receiver poorly. I heard him laughing. "No, the old man won't be a problem," he was saying to someone, presumably the auction house representative. "He's emotionally compromised. By the time he figures out what's happening, the gavel will have already fallen. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him." He thought I was a doddering fool, a grieving husband too weak to fight back. He was counting on it. He clicked back over to my line. "Philip, what is it?" His tone was sharp, annoyed. I hung up without a word. The rage that filled me was cold and clear. It burned away the fog of grief. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, my purpose suddenly solidifying. Beatrice was not a fool. She had known her stepson's character better than anyone. She would not have left me, or her life's passion, so completely unprotected. She was a meticulous planner. I simply hadn't found her plan yet. For the next 2 days, I searched. I went through every file, every safe deposit box key, every letter in her desk. I scoured her legal papers, her notes, her diaries. Nothing. It was all exactly as Arthur had said. A standard, straightforward will, leaving her personal property to her son. Despair began to creep back in. Had I been wrong? Had she, in the end, simply placed a tragically misplaced faith in the boy she had raised? I felt like I was chasing a ghost, a hope with no foundation. Defeated, I slumped into her reading chair. My hand fell upon the old photo album, the one Julian had called junk. I opened it, not looking for a clue, but for comfort, for a memory of her smile. I ran my fingers over a photograph of us in our first tiny apartment. A single, small abstract painting on the wall behind us. The first piece we ever bought together. The paper of the page felt thick, uneven. There was a slight bulge near the spine. Something I had never noticed in 50 years of looking. My heart started to pound. With trembling fingers, I carefully worked at the edge of the thick black papered backing of the page. It was glued down, but the adhesive was old and brittle. It peeled back with a faint tearing sound. Tucked inside, flush against the cardboard, was a folded piece of vellum, thin and semi-transparent. It was covered in my wife's elegant, precise handwriting and dated just 6 months before her death. At the top, in stark official lettering, were 2 words, "Codicil to Will." I had found her plan. The codicil was a masterpiece of legal precision, a scalpel hidden within a love letter. It didn't revoke the will. It clarified it. It stated that while Julian was the beneficiary of her personal property, the art collection itself had been reclassified years prior. For the avoidance of all doubt, she had written, the 17 enumerated artworks, and she listed every single one, from the Rothko to the smallest Klee sketch. They are not personal property. They are the corpus of the Beatrice Alcott Charitable Trust, established March 12, 2019. My hand shook as I read on. The document stipulated that upon her death, I, Philip Croft, was to retain lifetime tenancy of the collection, the right to keep them in our home. But the legal ownership, the title itself, had already been irrevocably transferred to the trust. And the trust's sole beneficiary? The Metropolitan Museum of Art. Julian wasn't inheriting a collection. He was inheriting an empty title, the legal equivalent of a hollow shell. He had no power to sell what he never legally owned. Tucked behind the codicil was a second document, a notarized deed of gift, officially transferring the collection to the trust. It was stamped and sealed by the New York County Clerk's office. Beatrice had done this quietly, without telling me, to protect me from exactly this kind of predatory fight. She had built a fortress around our life's work, and the key wasn't in a bank vault or a lawyer's office. It was hidden in a photograph of our first home, a place of pure, untainted love. My phone buzzed with another text from Julian, a picture of the Diebenkorn being professionally crated. Getting them ready for shipment to London, the message read, "The auction is set. Just need your signature on the final release forms. My lawyers will send them over tomorrow." He was so confident, so dismissive. He was crating up museum property, and the sheer, beautiful irony of it was breathtaking. His arrogance was now his greatest liability. He was creating a public record of his own crime. The funeral was the following week. It was an overcast and gray day. The weather, a perfect mirror for my feigned sorrow and quiet fury. I stood by her casket, greeting guests who offered their condolences for a loss that now felt multifaceted. They were mourning Beatrice. I was mourning her, and the boy her son used to be. Julian stood beside me, playing the part of the grieving son perfectly, accepting sympathies with a solemn face, while his mind was clearly on logistics and shipping manifests. After the service, back at the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. People spoke in low whispers, picking at untouched platters of food. Julian, however, was energized. He saw this not as a wake, but as a final inventory before a liquidation. This was when he chose to make his grand announcement, to stage my public humiliation and solidify his control. He gathered everyone in the living room, standing before the empty space where the Diebenkorn once hung, and began his speech about the injunction. He thought it was his coronation. I let him perform his entire brutal theater. I let him wave the court order. Let him mock me with his pronouncements of business. Let him enjoy the shocked silence of our friends. I let him signal his notary, a vulture ready to pick over the bones of my life. I watched the pity in Mrs. Gable's eyes, the restrained anger in Robert's face. I absorbed it all, letting his cruelty fill the room until it was a palpable thing. I needed witnesses, not for my defeat, but for his. And when he was finished, when the silence stretched and everyone waited for me to crumble, I simply cleared my throat. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Julian," I said, my voice calm and steady. It cut through the tension like a knife. Julian's smug expression faltered for the first time. He looked at me, a flash of irritation in his eyes. "There is no misunderstanding, Philip. It's all here in black and white," he snapped, rattling the injunction papers. "The court has affirmed my position." "The court has affirmed your position based on incomplete information," I replied, taking a single step forward. "You see, you filed an injunction on personal property, but the paintings haven't been personal property for several years." A murmur went through the room. Julian's face hardened. "What are you talking about? More sentimental nonsense? My mother's will is perfectly clear." I saw the first flicker of genuine doubt in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. The temperature in the room had shifted. I turned to address our guests. My wife, Beatrice, was a brilliant woman. She was a patron of the arts in the true sense. She believed, as I do, that great art ultimately belongs to everyone. I paused, letting the words sink in, which is why on March 12, 2019, she gifted the entire collection via an irrevocable charitable remainder trust to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Julian's face went white. The color drained from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. "That's a lie," he hissed, his voice a raw whisper. Your senile old man making things up. I almost felt a pang of pity for him. He was like a chess player who had just realized he'd been in checkmate for 10 moves. It's no lie, I said, owing a crisp photocopy of the codicil and the deed of gift from my jacket pocket. I believe these documents will clarify the situation. I handed them not to Julian, but to Robert, my wife's cousin, who was also a retired judge. Robert took the papers, his eyes scanning the first page. His eyebrows shot up. He read the next page, then looked over at Julian with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. My God, he breathed. He looked at Julian. This is a legally executed codicil and a filed deed of gift. The collection belongs to the museum. It has for years. The notary in the cheap suit began to discreetly pack up his scanner, recognizing the legal tide had turned with hurricane force. I turned my attention back to my stepson. So you see, Julian, the injunction you filed is meaningless. The auction you've scheduled in London in 48 hours is illegal. You haven't been securing your inheritance. My voice dropped, becoming colder, harder. You have been attempting to sell stolen property, museum property to be precise. That's a federal crime, I believe. The word crime hung in the air, glittering and sharp. Julian looked like he had been struck by lightning. But the will, he stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. The will said, personal property. It did, I agreed, and you are welcome to her personal property. Her clothes, her car, her jewelry. But the art, my dear boy, the art was never yours to sell. I could hear the faint, triumphant echo of Beatrice's laughter in my mind. She had known him so perfectly. She had given him exactly what he was legally entitled to, and in doing so, had protected what was truly valuable from his greed. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. He found none. Our friends and family were staring at him with a mixture of shock and disgust. He had revealed his true character in the most public way imaginable, and now he was trapped by it. The man who had entered the room, a conquering hero, was now just a common thief, exposed in front of everyone he had tried to impress with his ruthless efficiency. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind for weeks. The final checkmate. But watching his collapse, I felt a profound hollowness. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a confirmation of a terrible loss. The loss of the boy I remembered in Florence. The boy who had loved art before he learned to love money. I saw not a monster, but a man who had become so twisted by avarice that he had desecrated his own mother's memory for profit. I retrieved my phone and placed the call. Hello, is this Mr. Davies at the Art Loss Register? I asked, my voice carrying in the silent room. My name is Philip Croft. I'm calling to report the imminent, unauthorized sale of 17 artworks belonging to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Yes, I have the provenance documents right here. Julian flinched as if I had physically struck him. The name of that particular organization was well known, and its involvement meant international legal trouble. His face, once a mask of smug superiority, was now a canvas of pure panic. He saw his reputation, his business connections, his entire carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The London auction house would blacklist him. The museum would pursue legal action. The story would be a spectacular scandal. He had overplayed his hand so badly, he hadn't just lost the game. He had burned the entire board. The faint scent of lilies in the room now smelled cloying, like funeral flowers for his future. Please, he whispered, the word pathetic and weak. Philip, don't. It was the first time he had used my name without a sneer attached. He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched in a desperate plea. He was finally seeing me, not as an obstacle, but as the man who held the power to either detonate the bomb he had built or perhaps defuse it. All the cruelty, all the arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of consequence. I looked at his outstretched hand and then back at his face. I thought of Beatrice's quiet strength, her unwavering belief in justice and guardianship. She had left me a choice. I could destroy him utterly, or I could simply remove him. I owed her memory a clean ending, not a messy public brawl that would tarnish her name along with his. My revenge didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be final. I will make one more call, Julian, I said softly. I will call the museum's legal counsel. I will inform them that the collection currently in your possession was moved due to a profound misunderstanding of the estate documents. I let the lie hang in the air, a potential life raft in the storm he had created. I will suggest they arrange for a quiet, professional retrieval. In return, you will disappear from this house and from my life forever. It was an offer of mercy, but it felt like a sentence. He stared at me, his mind racing, calculating the odds. A quiet disappearance versus a public immolation. It was no choice at all. He nodded jerkily. A puppet whose strings had been cut. He couldn't even form the word yes. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the sour taste of his defeat. He had tried to steal $3 million and was now faced with the complete and total erasure of his connection to our family. I watched him walk towards the door. His shoulders were slumped. The man in the cheap suit was already gone. Julian didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. The guests parted for him as if he were carrying a disease. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the silent house. The finality of it was more powerful than any shouting match or court battle could ever have been. Robert, the retired judge, came to my side and placed a hand on my shoulder. Beatrice would be proud, Philip, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He handed the codicil back to me. She was always the smartest person in the room. I looked at the document, at her familiar script. It wasn't just a legal instrument. It was her final act of love, a shield she had forged for me from beyond the grave. Her foresight had been my salvation. After everyone had left, I was alone again in the quiet house. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of grief and loss. It was the silence of peace, of resolution. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the old, worn photo album. I didn't open it. I just held it. Its weight, a solid, reassuring presence in my hands. The scent of old paper and glue filled the air. It was the scent of victory, the scent of Beatrice. The next morning, 2 representatives from the Metropolitan Museum arrived. They were discreet, professional, and deeply respectful. I showed them the codicil and the deed of gift. Their lead counsel, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, reviewed the documents with a practiced eye. Everything is perfectly in order, Mr. Croft, she said with a small, appreciative smile. Beatrice was an exemplary patron. We are profoundly grateful. There was no mention of Julian, no hint of the near disaster. It was clean. They had brought their own art handlers, the team that moved with the quiet reverence of monks, then carefully uncrated the Devon corn and began the process of preparing the entire collection for transport. As they worked, Miss Albright explained the terms of the lifetime tenancy. The paintings will remain here in your care for as long as you wish, Mr. Croft. We will handle the insurance and any necessary conservation. Think of us as your new, very quiet partners. Beatrice had ensured I would never be alone with my memories. One of the handlers paused before the brooding Rothko. His expression won a ball. I've only ever seen this in textbooks, he said softly. To see it in a home, it's incredible. I smiled. My wife always said that art needs to breathe, to live with people before it rests in a museum. It felt good to speak of her vision, to know it was being honored. The house, which had briefly felt like a prison, was once again a sanctuary, filled not with the tension of ownership, but with the spirit of guardianship. As the day wore on, a comfortable rhythm was established. The museum staff worked. I made them coffee, and we spoke of art, of Beatrice, of the history of the pieces. The cold, sterile atmosphere Julian had created was gone, replaced by one of shared passion and mutual respect. The oppressive weight of the past few weeks was lifting, dissipated by the calm professionalism of people who loved the collection as much as we had. The house felt like my home again. Just before they left, Ms. Albright handed me a card. This is my direct line, she said. If you need anything at all, you call me. The museum takes care of its family, Mr. Croft." The word family struck a chord. Julian, born of my wife's blood, had tried to tear our legacy apart from money. These strangers, bound only by a shared love for art, were now offering the kind of support and protection he had so viciously withheld. The irony was as sharp as a shard of glass. That evening, I received a final, pathetic email from Julian. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a single sentence. "The release forms have been withdrawn." There was no apology, no explanation. It was the terse, cowardly admission of a man who had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered that he had nothing left to say. It was the digital equivalent of a slam door. I deleted it without a reply. He was already a ghost to me. I wondered, briefly, what would become of him. His reputation in the art world, which he had clearly been trying to cultivate, would be in tatters if even a whisper of this got out. His relationship with his mother's friends and family was irrevocably destroyed. He had traded a lifetime of love and connection for a gamble on a few $1,000,000, and had lost it all. His was a self-inflicted wound, a poverty of his own making. I walked through the living room, the paintings now back in their rightful places on the walls. The Diebenkorn seemed to shimmer with a renewed energy. The Rothko's deep colors felt warmer. They were safe. Beatrice's legacy was safe. My home was safe. I ran a hand along the gilded frame of a small landscape we bought in Provence. It was more than a painting. It was a vow we had made to each other, a commitment to beauty and history, a vow her codicil had honored. My gaze fell upon the photo album, still sitting on the reading chair. It looked so ordinary, so unassuming, an object Julian had dismissed as sentimental junk. Yet, within its simple cardboard pages, it had held the power to save everything. It was the perfect vessel for Beatrice's plan, a place so obvious, so personal, that a man like Julian, blinded by monetary value, would never even think to look. It was the ultimate testament to her understanding of his character. I thought of our trip to Florence one last time. I remembered Beatrice explaining the concept of pentimento to a young Julian, the traces of earlier work an artist paints over, a hidden history beneath the surface of a canvas. Our entire life was like that. Julian had only seen the glossy, valuable surface. He never bothered to look for the hidden layers, the foundation of love and meticulous planning that lay beneath, and that was why he had failed. A week later, a formal letter arrived from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was an invitation to a private gala celebrating their newest acquisitions. They had included a small, discreet addendum to the collection's placard. It would now read, "From the collection of Beatrice Alcott and Philip Croft, gifted through the Beatrice Alcott Charitable Trust." My name beside hers. She hadn't just protected the art. She had enshrined our partnership for posterity. The feeling that settled over me wasn't triumph, not the fiery satisfaction of revenge. It was a deep, quiet gratitude. Gratitude for my wife's wisdom, her love, her fierce, protective spirit that had reached across the veil of death itself. She had given me one last gift, the peace of mind to live out my days surrounded by the beauty we had built together, free from the grasping hands of greed. The phone rang one afternoon. It was Mrs. Gable. "Philip, dear," she said, her voice warm. "I just wanted to say how proud of you we all are." And how proud Beatrice would have been. Her words were a balm. The public humiliation Julian had orchestrated had been transformed into a public restoration of my wife's true, generous character. The story was known among our circle, not as a messy family squabble, but as the final, brilliant act of Beatrice Alcott. I found myself spending more time in Beatrice's old restoration studio. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil was a comforting ghost. She had left a small canvas on an easel, a minor work by an unknown artist she had been cleaning. I picked up one of her fine-haired brushes, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. There was work to be done. There was beauty to be preserved. My life's purpose, our life's purpose, had been reaffirmed. Months passed. The sharp edges of the conflict began to soften, replaced by the quiet rhythm of my days. I would read, tend to the garden, and sometimes just sit in the living room, in conversation with the paintings. They were old friends, and our bond was now secure, guaranteed by the quiet partnership of a great museum. I was no longer just an owner. I was a custodian, a guardian, the role Beatrice had always intended for us. I never heard from Julian again. It was as if he had vanished from the earth. I sometimes wondered if he understood the true nature of what he had lost. Not the money, but the legacy. The connection to a mother who, despite his flaws, had loved him enough to try and teach him the difference between price and value. He had failed her final lesson, and his expulsion was the consequence. One crisp autumn evening, I sat by the fire, the photo album open on my lap. I wasn't looking for secrets anymore. I was just looking at her face. In a photo from our wedding day, she was smiling, her eyes bright with a fierce, intelligent joy. She had always been a fighter, a protector. I had been so lost in my grief that I had forgotten the strength that lay coiled beneath her gentle exterior. She had fought for us one last time. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow on the page. The house was perfectly still. Outside, the wind rustled the dry leaves, a sound like a soft whisper. The recurring scent of old paper and my wife's memory filled the room, a perfume of enduring love and quiet victory. Everything was in its proper place. The chaos had been ordered. The betrayal had been answered. The trust had been honored. I reached for the pen and the formal acceptance letter from the museum's gala. It felt right to attend, to stand beside her legacy and represent the life we had built. It wasn't about showing off a victory, but about honoring a promise to keep the spirit of our collection alive, a promise to be the guardian she had trusted me to be. The battle was over, and the long, peaceful stewardship could now begin. I took the heavy, cream-colored invitation and the RSVP card to my desk. The silence of the house was a comforting blanket. With a steady hand, I uncapped my fountain pen, the same one Beatrice had given me for our 30th anniversary. The nib scratched softly against the thick cardstock as I filled in my name, accepting the invitation. I sealed the envelope with a decisive press of my thumb and left it by the door for the morning mail.